The swipe of a credit card, a platinum one, wasn't enough to calm the storm brewing inside Connor Valenti as he stood at the entrance of Manhattan's most prestigious baby boutique. His cousin Emily's baby shower wasn't exactly where he'd planned to spend his Saturday afternoon, especially after finalizing a billion-dollar acquisition just yesterday. But family was family, even for New York's most notorious oil magnate. "Will that be all, Mr. Valenti?" asked the salesperson, her eyes wide with recognition. Connor nodded, barely glancing at the ridiculous price tag on the custom-made Italian crib he'd just purchased. "Have it delivered to the Plaza Hotel, Roosevelt Ballroom by 3 o'clock. The Plaza." Of course, Emily would choose the most extravagant venue in the city. But he couldn't blame her. The Valentis had a reputation to maintain. As his driver navigated through Manhattan traffic, Connor scrolled through his emails. Another acquisition offer, another charity wanting him as their keynote speaker, another model asking for a second date. The monotony of success was beginning to wear on him at 33. The Plaza's iconic facade loomed ahead, and Connor straightened his custom Tom Ford suit as the car pulled up to the entrance. The doorman recognized him immediately. "Mr. Valenti, the Roosevelt Ballroom is on the second floor. Your cousin's event is already underway." Connor slipped him a $100 bill. "Thanks, James." The elevator ride was brief, but it gave him just enough time to prepare his thrilled-to-be-here face that he'd perfected over years of obligatory social events. When the doors opened, he was immediately assaulted by the scent of flowers and the sound of classical music drifting down the corridor. He paused at the ballroom entrance, taking in the transformation. The normally stately room had been converted into what could only be described as a magical garden. Cascading flowers in soft pinks and whites hung from the ceiling, while elegantly arranged table settings sparkled under crystal chandeliers. It was tasteful yet imaginative, nothing like the gaudy displays he'd seen at other society events. "You must be Connor," said a voice beside him, warm and confident. He turned to find a woman holding an electronic tablet, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Her eyes, a striking hazel, assessed him with professional interest. "Guilty," he replied, extending his hand. "And you are?" "Natalie James. I'm the event planner." Her handshake was firm, her smile professional but genuine. "Your cousin has mentioned you several times today. Apparently, you're notoriously late to family functions." Connor raised an eyebrow. "And yet, I'm actually early for once. 20 minutes early, to be exact." Natalie checked her tablet. "The first guest not related to Emily or her husband isn't scheduled to arrive for another half hour." Something about her directness intrigued him. Most people he encountered either fawned over him because of his wealth or maintained a careful distance because of his reputation as a ruthless businessman. Natalie James seemed to be doing neither. "Well then, Miss James, perhaps you could give me a tour of your handiwork. I'm genuinely impressed." A flicker of pride crossed her face. "I'd be happy to, Mr. Valenti, but I should warn you I'm not easily charmed by billionaires. I've planned events for several." Connor's interest piqued further. "Now I'm definitely intrigued." As Natalie led him through the room, explaining her design choices and the custom elements she'd created for Emily, Connor found himself paying more attention to the woman than to her work. She moved with purpose, her navy blue dress simple but elegant, no designer labels in sight. Her hands gestured expressively as she spoke about how she'd sourced sustainable flowers and hired a catering staff comprised entirely of women-owned businesses. "Emily mentioned you're quite the philanthropist," Natalie said as they approached a table filled with baby gifts. "Though I have to admit, I was skeptical given your industry's reputation." Connor's expression cooled slightly. "The oil industry isn't exactly beloved, I know. But my company has invested more in renewable energy research than any of our competitors." Natalie gave him an appraising look. "Actions over reputation. I can respect that." Before Connor could respond, the ballroom doors opened and Emily waddled in, her 7 months pregnant belly leading the way. Her face lit up when she spotted Connor. "You actually came early." She embraced him as best she could with her baby bump between them. "And I see you've met Natalie, my miracle worker." Connor smiled genuinely for the first time that day. "Your miracle worker was just giving me the grand tour. I have to say, Ems, you've outdone yourself with this hire." Emily beamed. "Isn't she amazing?" Natalie started her company just 3 years ago, and she's already the most sought-after event planner in the city. "I had to book her 9 months in advance before I was even pregnant." Natalie's cheeks colored slightly. "Emily, you're exaggerating." "I am not," Emily insisted, turning to Connor. "She just finished planning the governor's charity gala last weekend. The waiting list for her services is ridiculous." Connor found himself increasingly curious about this woman who had apparently built such a successful business in a short time, in a city where competition was brutal. "Well, I should continue with my preparations," Natalie said, stepping back professionally. "Guests will be arriving soon." As she walked away, Emily nudged Connor. "Stop staring, Connie, it's unbecoming." Connor frowned at the childhood nickname. "I wasn't staring, please." "I've known you since you were eating mud pies in the backyard. That's your I'm interested face." "I'm merely impressed by her work," he replied, though he knew his cousin wasn't buying it. Emily smiled knowingly. "She's single, you know, and brilliant. And not intimidated by powerful men, which is probably why you're looking at her like that." Connor shook his head. "I came here to celebrate your impending motherhood, not to get set up." "Multitasking is a valuable skill," Emily quipped. "Now come help me greet the guests." The next hour passed in a blur of air kisses, congratulations, and small talk. Connor found his attention repeatedly drawn to Natalie as she moved throughout the room, making subtle adjustments to the flow of the event. She handled a champagne spill with grace, redirected a potentially awkward conversation between feuding family members, and somehow managed to make Emily's difficult mother-in-law feel special without sacrificing the integrity of the event. When the formal program began, Connor took his seat at the family table, his gift, the Italian crib, having been delivered on time and met with appropriate awe. As lunch was served, he found himself seated directly across from Natalie, who had been invited to join them at Emily's insistence. "So, Miss James," Connor said as they were served the first course, "how does someone become the most sought-after event planner in New York by age?" 30, she supplied with a small smile. "And it was a combination of hard work, good timing, and knowing when to take risks." "Natalie's being modest," Emily's husband chimed in. "She left a high-powered job at Morgan Stanley to start her business. Everyone thought she was crazy." Connor's eyebrows raised. "Finance to event planning, that's quite a pivot." "Life's too short to spend it doing something that doesn't bring you joy," Natalie replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I was good at finance, but I'm great at this." "She has an MBA from Columbia," Emily added, "so she's not just creative, she's savvy." Connor found himself increasingly drawn to this woman who seemed to defy categorization. "What was your first event?" he asked. A genuine smile spread across Natalie's face. "A disaster. I planned my best friend's wedding on a shoestring budget. The caterer quit the day before, the flowers were wilted, and the DJ played the wrong first dance song." "Yet here you are, planning events at the plaza," Connor remarked. "How did you recover from that?" "I didn't quit," she said simply. "I stayed up all night cooking with my friend's mother, bought fresh flowers at 5 a.m. from the wholesale market, and created a new playlist myself. The wedding wasn't perfect, but it was authentic. The bride's cousin hired me for her baby shower, and things grew from there." As lunch progressed, Connor found himself engaging in the most genuine conversation he'd had in months. Natalie challenged his opinions on everything from business ethics to the best pizza in New York. She was intelligent without being pretentious, confident without being arrogant. When the baby shower games began, something Connor had been dreading, Natalie excused herself to oversee the activities. Connor watched as she directed the event with the precision of a symphony conductor, making each ridiculous game seem somehow elegant. Emily nudged him again. "You like her." Connor didn't bother denying it this time. "She's interesting. Just interesting." "What do you want me to say, Ems?" Emily sighed dramatically. "I want you to admit that for once you've met someone who sees past the Valenti name and fortune, someone who challenges you." Connor watched as Natalie laughed with a group of guests, her entire face lighting up. "Fine. I find her fascinating, but she clearly has no interest in me." Emily rolled her eyes. "For a brilliant businessman, you can be remarkably dense about personal matters. Ask her out." "It's not that simple," Connor protested. "She's working right now. It would be unprofessional." "Then wait until after the shower," Emily said, patting his hand. "But don't let her walk away without at least trying. You need someone like her in your life, Connie." The remainder of the afternoon passed pleasantly. Connor found himself actually enjoying the baby-themed festivities, particularly when Natalie caught his eye across the room and offered him a sympathetic smile during a particularly ridiculous game involving diapers filled with melted chocolate. As the event wound down and guests began to depart, Connor felt an unusual disappointment that the day was ending. He helped Emily and her husband gather their mountain of gifts, ensuring that his Italian crib would be delivered directly to their penthouse apartment. Just as he was preparing to leave, Natalie approached him with a small box in hand. "Emily asked me to give you this," she said. "Apparently it's some sort of family tradition." Connor took the box, recognizing it immediately as the silver rattle that had been passed down through generations of Valentis. The eldest cousin always received it to hold until the next baby was born in the family. "Thank you," he said, suddenly reluctant to end their interaction. "The shower was remarkable. You have quite a talent." Natalie smiled. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from someone who's presumably seen the best of everything." "Actually, I've found that wealth often grants access to the most expensive things, not necessarily the best," Connor replied honestly. Something in his tone must have resonated with her because her professional demeanor softened slightly. "That's surprisingly insightful." Connor took a chance. "I'd like to continue this conversation, perhaps over dinner sometime." Natalie hesitated, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Valenti, Connor," he corrected. "Connor," she acknowledged with a small nod. "I make it a policy not to date clients." "I'm not your client," he pointed out. "Emily is." A hint of a smile played at her lips. "A technicality." "I'm quite fond of technicalities. They've served me well in business." Natalie seemed to consider him for a moment. "I should tell you that I've read about you in the press. Your reputation with women is well documented." Connor winced internally. His past relationships, primarily with models and socialites, had indeed made tabloid headlines. None had lasted more than a few months. "The press rarely captures the full picture," he said carefully, "but I understand your hesitation." Natalie studied him, her hazel eyes thoughtful. "How about this? I'll be planning the charity gala for the Metropolitan Museum next Friday. If you happen to attend, perhaps we could continue our conversation there." Connor recognized the olive branch for what it was, not a rejection, but not quite acceptance either. "I believe I've just received an invitation from the Met in my email. What a fortunate coincidence." Natalie laughed, the sound genuine and warm, "I'm sure." "Good afternoon, Connor." As she walked away to supervise the cleanup, Connor felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of pursuit for someone who wasn't immediately won over by his wealth or status. Emily appeared at his side. "Well, did you ask her out?" "Not exactly," Connor replied, his eyes still on Natalie, "but I'll be attending the Met Gala next week." Emily clapped her hands together. "Perfect, she's been planning that for months. It's one of her biggest events of the year." Connor turned to his cousin. "You planned this, didn't you?" "Hiring her for your shower, seating us together." Emily's innocent expression didn't fool him for a second. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "But if I happen to notice that my workaholic, emotionally unavailable cousin might benefit from meeting a brilliant, independent woman who wouldn't put up with his usual nonsense. Well, that's just me looking out for family. Connor shook his head, but he couldn't suppress a smile. You're incorrigible. I prefer thoughtful, Emily corrected, resting a hand on her baby bump. Now go make yourself useful and find out what kind of flowers she likes before the gala. The week leading up to the Metropolitan Museum Gala passed excruciatingly slowly for Connor. He threw himself into work, finalizing acquisitions and sitting through endless board meetings. But his thoughts repeatedly drifted to Natalie James. On Tuesday, he gave in to temptation and had his assistant research her company. James and Associates had indeed risen meteorically in New York's competitive event planning industry. Their client list included not only the social elite but major corporations and cultural institutions. What intrigued Connor most was Natalie's commitment to sustainability and social responsibility. Her company donated a percentage of every fee to educational programs for underprivileged youth. By Thursday, he'd learned from Emily that Natalie preferred lilies to roses and that she lived in a modest apartment in Brooklyn rather than Manhattan, despite her success. She read historical fiction, practiced yoga, and had adopted a three-legged rescue dog named Einstein. You're acting like a teenager with a crush, his CFO remarked when he caught Connor distracted during a crucial budget meeting. Perhaps he was, but Connor couldn't remember the last time he'd been this intrigued by a woman or anyone, for that matter. Friday evening arrived at last. Connor's driver deposited him at the Metropolitan Museum steps, where the city's elite gathered in formal attire. The gala's theme was Renaissance Reimagined, and the museum's facade was illuminated with projections of famous Renaissance artworks. Inside, the transformation was even more spectacular. The Great Hall had been converted into a modern interpretation of a Medici palace, with contemporary art installations juxtaposed against classical designs. Servers in stylized Renaissance attire circulated with champagne and appetizers. Connor accepted a glass but declined several invitations to join conversations with business associates and socialites. His eyes scanned the room for Natalie. He found her near the Temple of Dendur, clipboard in hand, giving instructions to a staff member. She wore a deep emerald gown that complemented her complexion perfectly, her dark hair swept into an elegant updo. When she turned and saw him approaching, her professional smile transformed into something more genuine. "Connor," she greeted him, "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." "I never miss an opportunity to see exceptional work," he replied, gesturing to the spectacular surroundings. "This is remarkable even by Met Gala standards." Natalie looked pleased but tried to hide it. "Thank you, we've been planning this for nearly a year." "I brought you something," Connor said, producing a small gift bag from inside his jacket. Natalie raised an eyebrow. "You know I can't accept expensive gifts from guests." "It's not expensive," Connor assured her, "just thoughtful." Curious, she opened the bag and pulled out a tiny potted lily, a living plant rather than a cut flower. "Emily mentioned you prefer lilies," Connor explained, "and I thought you might appreciate something that lasts longer than a bouquet." Natalie's expression softened. "That's surprisingly thoughtful." "You seem surprised by my capacity for thoughtfulness," Connor observed with a slight smile. "Let's just say your reputation precedes you," Natalie replied candidly. "Oil tycoons aren't typically known for their sensitivity." Connor chuckled. "Fair enough. Perhaps you'll allow me the opportunity to challenge that perception." Before Natalie could respond, her earpiece buzzed and she held up a finger. "I'm sorry, the governor has arrived early. I need to go," Connor finished for her. "I understand, I'll be here." For the next hour, Connor observed Natalie from a distance as she expertly managed the event. He declined dance invitations from several women who approached him, including a lingerie model he'd briefly dated the previous year. When the formal dinner began, Connor found himself seated at a table with museum board members and corporate sponsors, none of whom included Natalie. He made polite conversation while keeping one eye on her as she moved between tables, ensuring everything ran smoothly. After dinner, as the dancing began, Connor was approached by a familiar face, Natalie's assistant whom he'd met briefly at the baby shower. "Miss James asked me to give you this," the young woman said, handing him a folded note. Connor opened it to find elegant handwriting. "Temple of Dendur, 10:30. If you're still interested in that conversation." Checking his watch, Connor saw it was 10:25. He made his way through the crowd toward the Temple of Dendur exhibit, where the ancient Egyptian temple stood illuminated by subtle lighting. The room was mostly empty as most guests remained in the main hall for dancing. Natalie stood alone, looking at the temple, her emerald dress catching the light. She turned as Connor approached. "I wasn't sure you'd get my note," she said. "I've been waiting for a chance to speak with you all evening," Connor admitted. Natalie nodded toward a bench. "I have 15 minutes before I need to oversee the dessert service. Shall we sit?" As they settled onto the bench, Connor noticed the tiny potted lily placed carefully beside her clutch. "You kept it with you," he observed. Natalie glanced at the plant. "It's quite portable, and it suits you," Connor said. "Beautiful, resilient, thriving in any environment." Natalie's lips curved into a smile. "Are you comparing me to a plant, Mr. Valenti?" "In the most complimentary way possible," he assured her. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the ancient temple before them. "You know what I find most interesting about your events?" Connor finally asked. "What's that?" "They're opulent without being ostentatious, luxurious without being wasteful. They manage to convey wealth while still maintaining substance." Natalie studied him. "Is that how you see yourself?" Connor considered the question. "It's how I aspire to be. Though I'm not always successful." "At least you're honest about it," Natalie remarked. "Most wealthy men I encounter believe their own mythology." "And what mythology do I have?" Connor asked, genuinely curious about her perception. Connor Valenti, ruthless oil magnate who expanded his father's company tenfold through aggressive acquisitions. Known for dating models and actresses, never for longer than 6 months. Rumored to work 18-hour days and expect the same from his employees. Generous with charities but demanding of results, Connor winced. "You've done your research." "I research all potential business connections," Natalie replied matter-of-factly. "Is that what I am, a business connection?" Natalie turned to face him fully. "I'm trying to determine that. You're Emily's cousin, which makes you someone I should maintain good relations with professionally. But you're also asking me to consider something personal, which complicates matters." Connor appreciated her directness. "What would help you make that determination?" "Honesty," Natalie said without hesitation. "Why are you pursuing this? You could have any woman in that ballroom. Most would be far less complicated than someone who values her professional reputation as much as I do." Connor took a moment to formulate his answer, knowing its importance. "Because those women want Connor Valenti, billionaire. You seem completely unimpressed by that aspect of me, which is refreshing. You challenge me intellectually. You've built something meaningful on your own terms." And he added with a slight smile, "You're the only woman who's ever compared me to an Egyptian temple." "I did not compare you to a temple," Natalie protested, though her eyes betrayed her amusement. "Not yet, perhaps, but I'm hopeful," Connor replied. Natalie checked her watch. "I need to get back." As she stood, Connor gently caught her hand. "Have dinner with me. Not tonight, not here, a real dinner, just the two of us." Natalie hesitated, then nodded. "Tuesday, I'm free Tuesday evening." "Tuesday it is," Connor agreed, releasing her hand. "I'll pick you up at 7. "I'll meet you at the restaurant," Natalie countered. "Text me the details." As she walked away, Connor called after her, "I don't have your number." Natalie glanced back with a smile. "Check your lily pot." Sure enough, when Connor examined the small plant, he found a business card tucked into the soil, with a personal number handwritten on the back. Tuesday evening found Connor uncharacteristically nervous as he waited at a table in a small, family-owned Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. He'd chosen the venue carefully authentic rather than trendy. intimate without being presumptuous. His security team had vetted the place thoroughly, and he'd arranged for a private corner table without making a fuss about his identity. When Natalie arrived, dressed simply in a blue dress and light jacket, Connor stood to greet her. "No private dining room, no velvet ropes," she teased as she sat down. "I thought you might prefer something authentic," Connor replied. "This place has been family-owned for 3 generations. The owner still makes the pasta by hand every morning." Natalie looked impressed. "You've done your homework." "I take dinner very seriously," Connor said with mock solemnity. The evening progressed with surprising ease. They discussed their childhood's Connor's privileged, but lonely upbringing as the heir to an oil fortune, Natalie's middle-class life in Connecticut with parents who worked as a librarian and a high school science teacher. "They were devastated when I left finance," Natalie admitted as they shared a tiramisu. "They'd been so proud when I got the job at Morgan Stanley, they couldn't understand why I'd walk away from that security." "And now?" Connor asked. Natalie smiled. "Now my mom brags to her book club about her daughter who planned the governor's wedding. They've come around." "What about you?" she asked. "Was there ever a moment when you considered a different path than taking over the family business?" Connor twirled his wine glass thoughtfully. "I wanted to be an architect in college. I studied it for 2 years before my father convinced me to switch to business." "You never told me that," Natalie said, surprised. "It's not something I usually share," Connor admitted. "It feels like a different lifetime now." "Is that why your office building won those design awards?" Natalie asked. "Emily mentioned you were heavily involved in its creation." Connor nodded, pleased that she'd made the connection. "I worked closely with the architects. It was my compromise with myself running the business my father built while creating something of my own." As the evening drew to a close, Connor paid the bill despite Natalie's protests. "Next time is my treat," she insisted as they stepped outside into the cool spring air. "Next time," Connor repeated, savoring the promise in those words. "May I walk you home?" Natalie hesitated. "I live just a few blocks away, but just a walk," Connor assured her. "No expectations." She agreed, and they strolled through the Brooklyn neighborhood, their conversation flowing naturally from architecture to travel to their shared love of historical fiction. When they reached her apartment building, a converted warehouse with large windows and exposed brick, Natalie stopped. "This is me," she said. "Thank you for dinner. It was not what I expected." "In a good way, I hope," Connor replied. Natalie nodded. "In a good way." There was a moment of tension between them, the kind that precedes a first kiss. Connor stepped closer but respectfully waited for her signal. Natalie made the decision, rising slightly on her toes to press her lips gently against his. The kiss was brief but perfect, a promise rather than a demand. "Good night, Connor," she said softly as she pulled away. "Good night, Natalie." As he watched her enter her building, Connor felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the simple joy of anticipation, of knowing this was just the beginning. Over the next few months, Connor and Natalie's relationship developed with a natural rhythm neither had experienced before. They met for dinner twice a week, working around Natalie's event schedule and Connor's business obligations. Connor found himself sharing thoughts and feelings he'd never revealed to anyone: his complicated relationship with his late father, his concerns about the environmental impact of his company, his desire to create something meaningful beyond wealth. Natalie, in turn, opened up about her insecurities in building her business, her fear of failing the employees who depended on her, and her dream of eventually creating a nonprofit to teach business skills to underprivileged girls. They argued occasionally. Natalie challenged Connor's tendency toward workaholism, while Connor sometimes found her stubbornly independent to the point of refusing help she genuinely needed. But their disagreements always ended in greater understanding rather than resentment. 3 months into their relationship, they attended Emily's baby shower, the event that had brought them together. As they watched Emily open gifts for her newborn daughter, Natalie squeezed Connor's hand. "You know," she whispered. I almost turned down planning this shower. I was already overbooked, Connor raised an eyebrow. What changed your mind? Emily mentioned her billionaire cousin would be attending, Natalie admitted with a mischievous smile. I was curious to see if you lived up to your reputation. And did I? Not at all, Natalie replied, leaning against his shoulder. You were much better. 6 months after their first date, Connor took Natalie to the rooftop of his office building, the one he'd helped design. The space had been transformed into a garden reminiscent of the baby shower where they'd first met, complete with cascading flowers and twinkling lights. What is all this? Natalie asked, clearly impressed despite her professional eye for such displays. I wanted to create something beautiful for you, Connor said simply. Though I had professional help, I'm not quite in your league yet. At the center of the rooftop stood a miniature architectural model, a building with innovative sustainable features and flowing organic lines. What's this? Natalie asked, examining the model. My new project, Connor explained. A headquarters for the Valenti Foundation. We're pivoting the company toward renewable energy over the next decade, and this will be the symbol of that transformation. Natalie looked up at him, her eyes shining. You're going back to your architectural roots. In a way, Connor agreed. I've been working with a team of designers, but the concept is mine. It's beautiful, Natalie said sincerely. Connor took her hands in his. There's something else I wanted to ask you. Natalie's expression grew serious as Connor reached into his pocket and produced not a ring box, as she might have expected, but a key. Move in with me, he said. Not to my penthouse, I know you think it's ridiculously ostentatious. We can find a place together, something that's ours rather than mine. Natalie's smile was radiant. You're not proposing, not yet, Connor said honestly. I want to do this right, build a foundation first, but I know I love you, Natalie, more than I've ever loved anyone. Tears glistened in Natalie's eyes. I love you too, and yes, I'll move in with you, but I'm keeping my apartment as an office space. Connor laughed. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. As they sealed the agreement with a kiss, with the New York skyline surrounding them and the stars above, Connor realized that, for all his billions, the most valuable thing he'd ever found had been waiting at his cousin's baby shower all along. 1 year later, Connor and Natalie stood in the garden of his family's Hampton estate, surrounded by friends and family. Emily's 1-year-old daughter toddled around in a flower girl dress, while Einstein, Natalie's 3-legged dog, watched attentively from his position of honor near the altar. The Valenti Foundation's new headquarters was under construction in downtown Manhattan, its design already winning sustainability awards. Connor had taken a step back from day-to-day operations of the oil business to focus on the Foundation's clean energy initiatives, finding a fulfillment in the work that had eluded him for years. Natalie's event planning business had expanded, with a new emphasis on sustainable luxury events. She'd hired a CEO to manage daily operations while she focused on creative direction and her new nonprofit mentoring program. As they exchanged vows under an arbor of lilies, Connor's idea, they promised not just love and fidelity, but partnership and growth. I never imagined, Connor said in his vows, that attending a baby shower would change my life. But walking into that ballroom and meeting you was the best decision I never knew I was making. Natalie's voice was steady despite her tears. You showed me that success isn't measured in contracts or clients, but in the courage to be vulnerable, to build something meaningful together. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, applause erupted from their guests. Connor Valenti, once known only for his billions and business acumen, had found something far more precious: a love built on mutual respect, shared values, and the willingness to grow together. And it had all begun with a baby shower, a determined event planner, and the courage to look beyond expectations to the person underneath.